caption. So long ago, I used to teach CIS-25. This is but I really love, like I said, right? I really love working with hardware. So what we're gonna do is we are gonna introduce you to some of the components. These are gonna be really easy if you're familiar with computer. Um, and so let's open assignment 1 so we can go through it together. It's really designed to kind of capture the chapter 1 information so that way you will be able to understand a little bit. So the computer system needs to have an input component. Yes. Okay, so close that. Are you logged in as yourself? Open up your browser. Go to outlook.com and then log in through that. And then click all apps at the top and you can access Canvas. Okay, so the computer needs to have an input, keyboard, mouse, right? On your smartphone, it uses touchscreen virtual keyboard. So any computer system must have a way to input. So if you ever go to the airport, right? You go and you check in your luggage and you need to input your confirmation number for your flight. Or if you ever go to Metro and if you want to buy a train ticket, it also is a terminal computer, right? You need to be able to put in your information and your credit card information. If you do self-checkout at the grocery store or at Walmart, right? You use a scanner system, right? Like a hand scan, or sometimes you need to put in the value, like I want to buy, 2 boxes of chips, right? So any computer system must have an input component or device, okay? And an example of an input component is a way that we can enter information into the computer. And that will be a keyboard, a mouse. Turn it on next. Also, it could be a touch screen. Now you can also have an input like a microphone, right? But the computer system needs to have an output. The output component is really for the human. It's really for the human to see the result of what they enter or the computation, the calculation that is being processed. So if you are using ChatGPT, you have an input, which is the prompt when you enter the data. And then ChatGPT will give you the result back and you see it on screen. So your screen becomes an output component. Also, you can also hear sound if you use something like Alexa. So Alexa is a computing system. It is an embedded system. And so there's different category in what we look at the computer systems in what we intend for it to do, right? So now you're going to pay attention to places that you go, because when you go into like Starbucks, right, you see their refrigeration system, you're buying something from the refrigeration area, like a sandwich. You see that these refrigeration system has actually a board that control the temperature. Typically, that's more of a simplified computer. That's more of like a microcontroller. So microcontrollers are a little bit different in your regular desktop or laptop in that it's only simplified to a function, like controlling temperature and humidifier, so that way food don't go bad, right? But in our computer, it's more complex. Like you can game, it's able to give you animation. So in that, you need to have appropriate input and output. So in computer design, in the engineering process, we really want to look at what is the intention of the system, right? So your AI computer, the servers, is actually a little bit more complex than what you see with your desktop, but ultimately it has hardware like processor, RAM, motherboard, input and output. Okay? So ultimately, based on von Neumann model, which was derived in the 30s, until today, we still use the same model in how we build the computer. Okay, any question? So for the first question, if you're doing the assignment, let's do it together. You can put down additional answers, or you can write down the answers that I have projected on the screen. External drive, right? So external drives can be used for downloading files, like I can download movies to it. I can store pictures and images of my family reunion, etc. But external drives are actually I/O. It's input and output because you're able to pull file from it and you're able to put file into it. So input devices are devices that we can enter data or enter information into the system. And output devices is what we can pull the information, the data from the system. Some devices are both, right? Like your external drive. External drives, you can pull data from it or you can put data into it, right? So some of them are both I/O, some of them are just output or input. Now, in your regular computer, you have a power supply, which you will see later. But in your, stop, I'm going to, one of these it's so this is like a cool laptop. Gateway is not around anymore, but this is what they give me to work with here. So your typical laptop, if you have a laptop, right? This is an older laptop. So we know that this is your input, your keyboard, your touchpad, and then your output is your display. Most laptop, the cost outside of the processor is the display, the highest cost. So if your laptop, if your screen is broken, it's gonna be high cost, right? And so in a laptop, typically some laptop would have battery that's detachable like this. You can see that there's a glider, right, that allows you to detach the battery. Now, a lot of the laptops go bad, it's because the battery goes bad or the charger connection goes bad, right? So it's not able to receive power cycle. So the main power source of your laptop, as we know, is the battery. Can you connect your laptop directly into your outlet? Sure, but it still cycles the power through your battery, regardless. So without the battery, the laptop doesn't technically work, right? But a lot of the modern laptop, I'm going to show you mine, right? So I have a gaming laptop that I use for work here, only because sometimes I need to simulate things, right? You can see my laptop doesn't have a detachable battery. A lot of the times now in the modern laptop, the battery is enclosed under the cover of your laptop case. So if I need to replace the battery for this laptop, I need to make sure, right, that I can open up the case, but it's best that you look at your manufacturer documentation before you start opening, because if it's very new, you avoid the warranty, right? So we want to make sure we check the warranty, or we look at how the layout of your laptop components would be. So it can be varied. So if you become a technician, a lot of the times you work with different brands, right? Different components. And so what will happen is that you have to refer to the documentation to make sure that you are troubleshooting the right thing, because you might be opening something else, right? And you're unable to find it. And in that process, it will be just a waste of time. So we want to make sure that we look at the documentation. And then you can always reach out to the vendor like Lenovo, HP, and they can give you some appropriate information with that. Do you have any questions for me regarding some of this information? If I go too fast, if you have a question, let me know. Okay. So, yes. Okay, so click on the all apps here, the dots. And then you need to click more apps. Like that. And then you can put X out of that. Okay, we took Canvas. Yeah, you can go that way. It's a lot easier. Yeah, or you can log into it separately. Oh, really? Okay, give me your USB and I can give you the files. Did you get a USB? Okay. Okay, so for question 3, it says, what should you do before beginning to repair a laptop, right? We want to make sure that we don't get hurt, right? Which is through the power. So you need to make sure that it's unplugged, right? From the outlet, and we need to remove the battery completely. Well, what if it's a modern laptop, right? Like I can't detach the battery. So what you need to do is you need to open the back panel and be able to remove the battery. Give me a second. Let me make sure I grab the files. Say it again. I'm sorry? MacBook? I can talk about MacBook, but you know, Apple has specialized things. I think they passed a law where you can upgrade Apple systems, but if you're not certified and open up their system, it voids the warranty. Yeah, it's a way for them to make money, you know? Yeah, we can talk about MacBook. I just want to make sure it's open. Okay. Sometimes I grab files on Cloud Drive and it doesn't. So you have it now. If you need one also. But I can bring you. Oh, I give you one. You can pick one. What color do you want? You want an orange one? Okay, I'll put the files on there first. Okay, so we talked about making sure that it is unplugged, right? And then we need to make sure that we, sorry, let me, I have a way to drop files, but sometimes it crashed my computer because of that. That's one.
I can't pull mine up. The
On the USB?
I don't
Okay.
yeah, it's what it's fine.
All right. So everybody passes. Yes. Click enable edit. Okay. Yeah. When you first download it, it doesn't allow. It gives you read only. Okay,
You think maybe that's why mine's.
Yeah, you have to click enable edit in order to type it.
Ours is it's not popping up. USB.
Where's your USB? Here. Okay, here. Yeah, because I think the socket that they use there is not connected directly to the computer. It's only to the side, like for charging it works, but not for data. Okay. If you want to, you can get one, but as long as you can work on the files and have your files saved, I'm fine. Yeah. All right. So we took care of the files. So when you do technical support, a lot of the times most company would use a specific brand like Dell, Lenovo, HP, right? So how can I go about looking for a certain model, right? This isn't like an older model, but so if you have Lenovo T470, all you have to do is visit Lenovo.com, right? On their website, you should have a support option and you can put in the model number and it would give you what it's called a manual. It's in PDF. You can download the manual and be able to read like how to be able to go and look for certain components. So if I need to replace the battery, I can look at that specific model and be able to remove the battery where it's located. But let's say that you have another Lenovo model. Is it exactly the same? No, not necessarily, right? So sometimes they produce a group of systems with a certain design, and then the next model they change. So sometimes it's always good, right? Rule of thumb is that we go look at the manual before you start opening it, because sometimes you open it and you try to find it, you're going into the wrong location physically, and then it will be a waste of your time. So study the manual before you start opening it. And you can, I'm sure you can view YouTube video and tutorials and different things online. Those are good resources. And now you can ask AI also, right? So AI scrape the web, it pulls the data, it gives you reference like Gemini, and give you references to possibly Lenovo or other resources, right? So that way you can repair your computer. Any question? Okay. I'm sorry?
Is this called something?
The USB. So what you want is you want to access your drive. Be able to access or
Edit.
yeah, so yeah, you just need to go.
Take the game of swap copy, it's Jeffrey, big so. Oh, no, there's still some.
Oh,
It's all the.
Oh, it doesn't have a USB connection, not a C, right? You don't have profile open. The post tabs open file. And then look for your drive. Yeah. Assignments. That's just a yeah. You don't have Word, so that's why it's not pulling up your file. Yes.
Also.
All right. Any questions? Okay. So when we work on our lab today, right, you're gonna use some tools. And what I'll show you is that we have kits that you typically use. At home, you might not have a lot of these equipment, but all you need is small screwdrivers. You can typically use your universal Phillips. So this is an anti-static mat, right? You can get these online. I think now they're probably close to $20, but sometimes you can find them for a few dollars. If you don't have this, what you need to do is you need to touch something that's metal, okay? Like your file cabinet. Not to work on the computers on carpeted floor, but a lot of the homes have carpet floor because when you walk on the carpet, it creates static. And static causes damage to storage or systems, okay? So before you work on the computer, when you open up components, before you start touching the components, you need to touch something metal. What that does is it grounds you, right? On floor like this, it's grounded. You typically the tiles, everything is good. It doesn't create too much static electricity. Now a kit like this would have a lot of different tools that you can use for computer repair. You can find these from like $25 to $40 a kit, depending on how complex. Sometimes most laptops will require you to have small screwdriver, but if you don't have a small screwdriver kit or a kit like this, you can go to Home Depot and get some small screwdriver, right? To stores like that, and then you might sometimes need a flathead, but typically you would need like a tweezer. I recommend having a small flashlight because sometimes it's hard to see the components, especially inside the desktop. So this is my recommendation. Now, some anti-static mats would have a wrist strap, so I'll give you some of those. What you do is you clip it to the metal case or metal area of your workspace. What that does is it keeps your body grounded. And so, number one, you don't get shocked. Number two, you don't shock the system, right? Because electricity, more currents generated, that's gonna the static is gonna cause damage to RAM and motherboard and other things. So what you want is you want some of these components. And I also recommend having like a small container to put your screws. So whenever I do lab with students and when they open things up, they always end up losing the small little screws to the back of the laptop. So if you lose a screw, things don't come back intact, right? It's gonna probably fall off eventually when people move it. So make sure that we secure the screws, and you can just use things like a small container to do that, like a jar. So those are some of the tools that I recommend. You don't have to have a big toolkit, but if you have a very large toolkit, that's helpful. Now, if you work on tablets, you need to have like suction cups and other things. So some of the kits actually, they sell them with those components, because you have to remove the screen part, detach it from the back in order to access it to troubleshoot like the all-in-one or the tablets. Okay, I'll show you. We have some kits that have that. Okay, let me move 5 and 6 down to the next page. Okay. So for 6, it says, why should you document and label components before removing or replacing laptop components, especially if you're not familiar with hardware, right? So what I did when I was a field technician is, if the model is new to me or if I don't know how to work on it well, I would use some kind of label, Post-it works. The best thing that you can probably do is when you open it up, take your phone, take a picture of it. And so that way, when you put things back together, you can look at that picture in case you don't know what goes where. It's very important that you look at how it's originally is installed, so that way you don't have missing things coming back, right? I worked with a lot of field technicians before, and a lot of the times what they do is they struggle in fixing because a lot of the time they're just trying to find like issues and areas. So the best way to troubleshoot is to really plan things out accordingly, so that way you don't have to go back and trying to figure out like what is wrong, right? So that's a challenge. So A+, the certification, it really emphasized that because the test itself is really they want to prepare you to become a technician. Okay. So we want to make sure we document and label. You can make notes, take pictures, so that way you can reassemble the computer. Okay, so let's look at these together. So you see, we're going to go through and we're going to label one, right? 2, 3, 4, and 5. Okay, let me zoom out a little bit. So that way you know what the components are. Okay. So as you see, this is an older laptop, likely that it looks something like this, right? When you open up the panel, some of these, they have a separate area for storage, like drives and RAM and other adapters, like your internet or your Wi-Fi adapter or other things. And then, so when you open up the back panel, remember, we want to remove the battery. You see how the battery is detached at the top? It's empty here, right? Okay, so for number 1, when you look at this is a shield that goes on top of the drive, okay? When you lift that up, you have the drive. Most systems now have solid state. The difference between solid state and your older hard drive is that the older hard drive, right, it has platter that spins. Just imagine, I think some of you know what is that? Like a laser disc or a CD player or DVD, right? Some of you might even be born after that. So it has these round cylinder platter that spins. And the head uses the laser to move back and forth, kind of like a record player. Now, the needle, like on the record player, actually touches the record. But on the hard drive itself, and we'll go more into the hard drive, it doesn't touch it, okay? Now, the problem with the hard drive traditionally is that it crashes or it has a lot of error as the mechanical components is breaking down over time. So imagine like if you have a record player or DVD player that's spinning slow, it stops spinning, it's scratching the records, right? So that's a problem typically with the hard drive. So underneath this, the number 1 is your hard disk or hard drive. The drive stores your operating system, right? In a typical PC, the drive stores the OS, okay? Now, if you're looking at a MacBook, same concept, okay? Now, in the MacBook, what you see is that in the panel, when you open it up, it still has RAM. A lot of it now is soldered onto the actual board. That means that they manufacture the board with the RAM itself on the board, right? Where you can't remove it, so that way, if you want to upgrade, you just have to buy a new computer. That's how Apple makes money, right? But on the PC, what you see is you have separate components that you can take out, okay? So hard disk and hard drive, its job is to store your files, your operating system, your software, but software does not work without RAM, okay? I teach programming and I always talk to students about buffer overflow and security and also programming, in that you have to have enough RAM in order to accommodate software application, because the RAM is a temporary storage. The hard drive is a permanent storage. It stores some stuff temporarily, but typically it is in the form of permanent file, right? Even when you're looking at like virtual memory and so on. So then on number 2, if you see this is an adapter for wireless communication. It's a card that's like this big, right? So when you install these cards, don't touch the green part or the gold part, right? Try to hold it from the edge and slide it in. So it's really designed to hook it into a socket right here or a bus, so that way you can just attach it so you have wireless. Now, most of the new modern laptop, the motherboard has the Wi-Fi board built in. That means that they designed a board that already has that. You don't need an adapter. So what if it fails? You can buy a USB one, right? Which you can attach it externally to the USB port over here, so that way you can have Wi-Fi. Okay. That's a quick way to kind of, set up your system so that way it can communicate with the internet, because when we troubleshoot, sometimes we need to connect to the internet to download things like drivers and so on. We'll talk about those files. Okay, any question? Okay, so we're familiar with the Wi-Fi adapter, the drive. We'll open these up later. And then you're gonna have RAM, which is this right here. So laptop RAM is different than regular RAM. I have a lot of parts, so let me give you some. I'll pass it around. And each CIS-824A in here. I get system that's loose, the same put it back. Okay, so I'll pass these around so you can see. These are new components. So this, I'm sure some of you know, and some of you might be new to this. This is a solid state drive, okay? It's different than the hard drive in that it's like, it looks like an adapter. Goes into the socket. If you ever build a computer, you would know that. So solid state drive works similarly to your USB drive called flash memory. Okay. So what that does is that it stores file, right, using tags, and it doesn't need to have any kind of things that spins and store, kind of like what we talk about with the record player. You see the gold parts here? This is the where you plug things into the socket. When we say socket, it's just like how you plug electrical socket, right? Plug it into your board, okay? So this is a drive that's considered solid state. I'll pass this around. So when you handle these, do not touch your finger with where the gold part is, because even if you wash your hands 100 times, your hands have oil and it will cause damage to the actual components. And then also the chip part, okay, which is on top right here. A lot of the times, if you touch it, sometimes it doesn't damage it, but just remember, right? We ground and then we hold it on the edge, okay? So see. So this is your RAM. Now on the RAM for the laptop, which is a little bit different than what you see in the regular RAM. It is much smaller. Okay? So these are called small outline dual inline memory module. That is why it says so DIMM, right? This stands for small outline dual inline memory module. So whenever you see a dual inline memory module, it synchronously writes data to the chip on here, which stores your application. So if I'm gaming, right, it uses the information to simulate what you see with animation for pixel. Okay. Now, dual inline memory module, typically, if you have a pair of RAM, it does back and forth. Okay. Whereas if you only have one card, it's only going to store on one. But think of it this way, right? Like if you have ice tray, if you fill across like 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, that's what the computer does. It writes one card to the next card and so on. That's why it's named dual inline memory module. Okay. Now, most of the RAM in the market is DIMM. Okay. And technically, you rarely see things that are a little, SIM or other areas, because that's either legacy technology or specialized system. So when you look at a laptop RAM, it will be like small like this, or like the picture, you see? But on a regular RAM, it's much longer, okay? Because it's really designed for bigger systems. Any question? So I'll pass these around so you can look. Remember when you handle these, just hold them at the edges. Absolutely. Okay. Next, we're going to talk about CMOS battery, which is number 4. You might not see a little bit of it. So just think of it like if you ever looked at a watch battery, it's like that round. Or if you use some kind of components that have a flat battery, right? CMOS battery it uses, I think, the CR2325. It keeps your clock. Now, in the new motherboard, a lot of them don't have external battery that you can detach anymore. It has a chip that acts as a battery. So what you do is to reset it, you just use a jumper. But in order to reset the configuration to this system, you can detach the battery. When we open it up, we can see, so that way you can reset your clock or you reset your system configuration. You need to remove it for like about a minute or so, right? Okay. And then for number 5, you already know that this is where the battery goes, right? Okay, so let's talk about when you are repairing a laptop. Thank you. The first step, and probably is the hardest. Actually, no, but removing the screen is the hardest. Is what we have to do is we have to repair where we need to access the bottom below this, right? So I had a laptop and I was letting my friend use it, and my friend has spilled Coca-Cola all over it, right? While it's on, right? I quickly turn it off, and what I had to do is I had to remove the keyboard to make sure that the acid from the soda doesn't get to my and it didn't. So did you know that on a typical keyboard, like a USB one that you're using, if you spilled something on it, like sticky soda, you take it off, you put it in your dishwasher, you put it on a high rinse cycle, no soap, right? Just water. What that does is the pressure from the water, it sprays all the sticky particle out. You take it out, you lay it on the towel, and you let it dry completely. Then what you have is a clean keyboard. Don't use the Q-tips and go in and try to clean because that's too long, right? So in order to repair some laptop, you need to make sure that you disconnect the power, first rule. Second, you need to remove the battery. And then in some cases, we remove the back panel or we remove the top, okay? On the HP, you know, those very slim laptop that they sell, right? Typically, you can't remove a lot of things from the back. You have to remove everything from the top. And you have to be really careful because if you chip anything from the top, basically that laptop, you have to replace all those parts or replace the laptop itself, right? So make sure we remove the power. And so battery power, as we know, is AC. Your household power, the one that you plug into the wall, that's called DC, right? So your charger, it converts the AC current or the DC currents into the AC. Remember, your computer is integrated circuits. It's made of groups of circuits, and it receives electrical signal and diverts that. So the battery takes that electrical power and distribute it to the rest of the components, okay? So if you remove the power, then you can safely remove the components. That's just a rule of thumb. Okay. So the best performance right now in the market is your solid state drive. It writes faster, it has less error. Your data is generally stored in a manner where it can be retrieved, read, and write quicker. It doesn't have mechanical components that can be broken down. So solid state drive is ideal, and they're fairly affordable. They come in internal drive and external drive. Okay. Now, does drive last forever? Depends on how you use it, how much you use it, the wear and tear behind it, also the design in the drive. So I teach forensic in the fall, and we go over like how when you delete data, can people pull it? Definitely, right? So the way that your information is stored onto drive is it writes over. It's kind of like, you know how you have houses in the neighborhood and a family moved out, that house is empty, a new family will rent that house and move in. That's exactly how data works. It basically make that house become available for the next family, right? So that's called dynamic writing, in that when you delete the file, it technically just put it into a slack space. That means that that space becomes available for the new file. Fragments of it remains, okay? So even when we delete the file, technically in forensic, we can go back and we can find it. Did you know that when you delete your chat messages, your email, stuff on your phone, your images, right? And if the police gets a hold of your phone and they go put it through forensic, they can retrieve some of the stuff that you deleted. So the way flash memory works is it's dynamically writing, so fragments of your information remains in the slack area, which is available space for the new file. Okay. Okay. So the type of RAM that is typically used in the laptop, what you see is small outline dual inline memory modules. That's called a SODIMM. And the current one, I think they're at DDR5 now, right? But when you go out in the field today, you're going to see a lot of laptops still using DDR4. The system that you are sitting in front of, this is Alienware. That's probably top of the line, now owned by Dell, right? If you buy it brand new, it's very pricey, but still, these computers, we got it a while ago, it's DDR4. Okay. And DDR4, so each of the number here represents speed. So exponentially, when they up the number, it just means that they up the speed of read and write cycle. So the design has improved over time to really accommodate the need that you have in gaming, in processing, in running applications, in using the internet, et cetera, et cetera. Okay. So can my computer work without RAM? Absolutely not. This is why your smartphone, you know how when you buy all the storage, right? Not only for your OS, but for your app. So without the storage, your system doesn't work. Think of like the storage, the hard drive is like the stomach of your body, right? So if you have storage, you know, if you eat, then you are going to feel well, and then you're going to do things. So the computer, it needs to have storage to store information for processing. Okay, any question? So let me zoom out a little bit so we can see better in the back. Or zoom in. Tired, sleeping? Okay, I'm gonna be done soon. The lunch. Okay. So 11. You are gonna have a lot of scenario questions if you're gonna go for certification. I like to put these questions because my students go for jobs and they get asked these questions on their interview, right? We have the apprenticeship program for IT and cybersecurity where students get jobs through it. So a question might be that somebody bought a laptop. This is the model, right? It has 4 gig of RAM, which is very minimal. Now you typically see 8 gig is the cheapest model. You have, and this is the DDR4 2400. So when you look at the number 2400, that represents megahertz, right? Megahertz is the frequency on how, right? The currents that it can receive convert it to megahertz. So when you look at this, we want to make sure that if we upgrade the RAM, it needs to be equivalent to that number or higher. So when you buy new RAM for this computer, you look at this number, you can say, oh, I can go for 3600 DDR4. It has to be DDR4, or I can go for equivalent. Okay, so it's like buying tires for a car. I'm sure you're familiar with it, even if you don't drive, right? You've seen people, you can't replace the tire that's different size than your wheel. So this is your wheel size. Think of it that way. It has to be equivalent or higher. Okay. All right. So if this person, if your customer wants to upgrade the memory so that way they can run more application, what we can do is one, we can add another card, another memory card. Right now she only has one. Now we're going to add a second one that's going to give her 8 gig because 4 plus 4 is 8. But remember, it needs to be the same or better. Okay? And that's just your basic rule. Okay? All right. I see that some of you have MacBook, right? I saw that you have a USB adapter to it. Back in the day, laptops don't really have a lot of slots. Similarly, now they reduce your laptop. So my laptop doesn't have a lot of the typical components that you see in a desktop, right? I have an Ethernet and I have like maybe 3 USB ports. That's it. Depending on the model that you get. So back in the day, if people want to use other devices, they have to attach it to the laptop. Okay. So the purpose of a card reader, you guys know micro SD, right? You use that for your tablets or other devices that you have. That is basically to be able to have data. But back in the day, what they do is they use a card reader. Think of it like, you know how you go and pay your credit card, you do a tap and then it processes the transaction. So some businesses, they would use a card reader to verify, same thing, for transactional payments, for access control, like to log into their network, for signature verification. So that was a common things. Now, why am I teaching old technology? It's because even today, when you go out to the workplace, you will see older systems because business don't replace systems unless it's broken. Okay. Okay. Now, as you know, I'm gonna come back to here, right? If you want more notes to read, what you do is you can find the notes that I'm using to answer these questions on the notes pages. See? You can refer to this page, page 2, for more pictures and explanation. And then see the drive, that's what it's shown here. And remember, your laptop drive is smaller than your regular desktop drive for the hard drive. So you can see more pictures and explanation on the actual notes. Okay? We have a whole chapter on RAM, so I'll come back to this. Okay, and then it also tells you the steps on how to take it out and how to install it. So here's a card reader. This is what it looks like. To me, still, like, I think only if you are looking, so now a lot of the times business use a separate component for it, like Square. You can have a tablet that's attached with a device to be able to process payments. I don't know if you've seen that at like coffee shop or the smaller businesses, but back in the day, you have to plug in an adapter, a card reader, so that way it would process your transactions similarly to what you see at Square today. Okay. Okay. So here it talks about PCIe. Okay. And PCI stands for peripheral component interconnection. It is a form of a bus. So when I say a bus, what that means is it's just a path for us to travel, right? Like just imagine like the public bus drives on the road, right? So it's the road for your information to go from the components to your computer. And so there's different form of road, just like what we have with highway, your in-town road, right? You have toll road, right? So the system has many form of roads or buses. And they are particularly for external components or components that can be added to your computer, okay? So what you see in the next question, oh, I went too far. So number 13, it says explain the purpose of the MPCIe. The little e stands for express. So think of it like, I'm sure you guys know, to avoid traffic on the 91 freeway, you take the express lane, right? So this lane is faster than your regular lane, okay? So your MPCI, the regular, is slower. Where it has the little e, then it's express, right? So that means that I'm able to have more lanes, and those lanes drive faster compared to what you don't. You have a regular road where maybe the lane is more narrow and there's more cars. So what you do is, the purpose of this is to plug in more peripherals, like your card reader or an audio adapter, for people who edit videos, like now content creator, right? They can just use their smartphone. But back in the day, when people edit videos or audio for like song, music, they would use peripheral devices, adapter that goes for sound, for video. Okay. So, laptops or even smart devices like your tablet, typically, mostly laptop, it would use LCD, liquid crystal display, right? Now, if you read, you already know that LED consumes less energy, okay? You guys know what the O stands for? OLED. Oh my God, LED. No. Organic.
LED.
Okay. So LED uses a backlight, right? That makes it brighter and it consumes less energy. I have a Galaxy, the Fold phone, right? And I'm sure you've seen these, and I'm sure you've seen bendable screens, right? These are LEDs, and they're made in a way where it is flexible. So you can fold it, you can bend it a certain way. So it still technically uses LED in the back. The downside about these things is LCD, sometimes you would have some burn-in, right? LCD is not as bright. Some LCD consumes more or less energy. LED typically has less energy consumption, but the backlight does burn out. And like I mentioned, laptop screens is probably the second most expensive component on a laptop. So if you need to replace the LED screen or the LCD screen sometime, if the cost is more than the laptop itself, just buy a new laptop. That's my recommendation. But anyway, so these are the typical screen that you see on a laptop. So I had a laptop, I should have brought it. My adapter for my battery, when you plug into charge, it stopped functional. It's not functional anymore. And so to replace it, I have to buy a part from China, which costs me $2, right? But I have to remove my screen and a lot of these things to be able to connect it. So if the laptop is not functioning because the battery doesn't charge, typically you should check your DC jack, which is where you plug in your AC adapter to charge. Okay. That's often where if you have a bad battery, it's because of this. It's very, very common.
But when your battery on your laptop is swollen.
It's swollen is because you overcharge. Yeah, so if you have a swollen battery, you can tell when you set it on a flat surface, it wiggles, right? You move it, it swivels. It happens a lot on Chromebook. I know this, right? So the rule is that they're gonna sell you components that's half charged. Okay. So what you can now on the new battery, the cycle is not remembered. So what you do is you fully charge it, use it until it's almost depleted, and then charge it. Because I have a tendency to, I'm like, oh my God, I want to charge my laptop because I have 25% left, right? Or 50% left. So over time, if you keep charging like that, it overcharges and it swells. So a poorly made battery tends to have that happen. Yeah. Okay, next question. What components must you disconnect when you are removing your system board, the actual board? Remember that all your drives and your memory is attached to a board, right? That's like the nervous system of the laptop. So what you need to do is, one, you need to remove the components that's attached to it. It's kind of like if you like working on cars, right? You're familiar with cars. In order to remove the motor, you have to remove other things that's attached to the motor. Is that correct? I mean, it's just typical troubleshooting common sense. Things that are sitting on top of it, we wanted to remove that before we could get to the bottom. Okay? So you need to remove the attached storage devices and components. Sometimes it will be a fan. So just keep in mind that when you remove systems, especially regularly used systems, you're gonna find links and things in it. So it's good to kind of like have something to dust it out. If you're using the compressed canned air, just remember, read the instruction and spray because the canned air sometimes has residue, and residue will destroy components if you have the residue on there. I typically just use like a hair dryer and I just turn it on full blast and I blow it out. But you can also use those compressor air hose, which is very strong in my opinion. But yeah, you can do that. So clean it out. So you can remove your fan, sometime your screen, sometime cables and screws. So we talked about OLED and LCD. OLED, brighter, lighter, more energy efficient, faster for the refresh rate, and thinner. So I'm going to ask you this. When you buy a TV, what do you care about? Size, that's right, right? Some people buy for the size. What else?
Graphics.
4K or 8K, right? Resolution, because sometimes you might be watching something with high definition on it. Most TV now is sold with 4K. What else? Somebody said it, I heard. Refresh rate's important. It's really good for your eyes. So the higher the refresh rate, the better it is. Okay? So when you look at the spec for your screen, it's gonna tell you like your standard is like 60 hertz. So if you buy a gaming monitor, typically they are higher in quality, like these monitor, and they are higher in hertz. Okay? So how can you tell? You ever record a video of somebody watching TV or the screen and you see the flicker on there? That's the refresh rate. Why is it that we cannot see it with our common eye, but we can see it on a video? It's because our eye is too slow for the rate. Whereas if you capture it on the video, your phone process it at a different frequency, so that way you can capture the actual refresh rate. Okay, does that make sense? Any questions? So, all right. Okay. So, now we're gonna talk about screen repair a little bit, and also like power converter. So we touched on LCD and OLED, and we're going to talk about the inverter. So the inverter in the laptop is a way that it can convert power from your DC power into your AC so it can charge, right? And this is used for inversion to give you the backlight on your screen. Okay. That's important to know. I want to go over this so when you open things up today, you're like, oh, this is what it does, right? So if your inverter fails, then your screen is black. I have a lot of students asking, oh, I have this laptop. I mean, it turns on, but I see nothing on screen. So I tell them the screen is bad. Typically, if it's like it uses an inverter, the inverter went bad. So if you look into the cost of replacing the inverter, if you take it to a technician, they're gonna tell you, oh, they have to take your screen apart. The labor charge in it is kind of like working on your car. One small components, but it's gonna take them a long time. They're gonna charge you a lot. So replace the entire screen is probably ideal. If you cannot do that, replace the laptop. Okay. So if your inverter is bad, it cannot give the power to the screen, so you get black screen. Okay. Now, how can I know when it's going bad? Your screen is flickering, right? And then sometimes it doesn't turn on. It also could be loose connection too, but yeah, typically on the LCD, that is a common problem. It is inexpensive, right? You can do it. There's tons of tutorial for it. But like I said, it's gonna take time. So if you think it's like might be 30 minutes, probably not, right? So research, plan, and then be able to troubleshoot it. But if you pay someone to do it, they have to take your screen apart and replace it. And that will take them at least an hour. So on average, technician now they probably charge close to $100 an hour. Question? Yeah.
Is that it more economical just to go buy more?
Yeah. I think it's because your systems are very affordable now, right? There's a lot more supply compared to demand. So, if you looking at a cheap laptop, let's say that your laptop was originally $400. If your screen replacement is already $250, you make that decision, right? It is more, and you might have a faster system if you buy a new system. But in companies, a lot of times they have to go through all the troubleshooting process before they replace that system. Typically, in most business, they replace the system every 5 years. So if the system is completely damaged and they cannot replace it anymore, then they'll buy a new system. So yeah, so sometimes you have to fix it for your job, basically. Okay, so we're gonna talk a little bit more about fixing backlight failure. You have to completely disassemble the display. Some display is easy, some display you have to use a suction cup to separate the screen from the back component. And then you have to get inside and be able to look at individual components. TV repair place is not as common anymore, like you said, right? It's cheaper to buy. You can buy very large TV now for less than $200. So it's, people just scrap the TV and buy a new one because it's probably not worth the money to pay someone to fix your TV anymore. Back in the day when you have your grandparents' TV, the CRT, the big bulky TV, those, right, the parts are cheap, but also like the repairs sometimes can be expensive if they need to fix a lot of things. And those you have to properly ground them. You can get hurt very badly if you don't do it correctly. So if someone throw that on the sidewalk and you pick it up and you're trying to open it up, make sure you research carefully before you opening it up because you can get hurt, right? The CRT, the big bulky TV. They become historical components now. Those are pretty cool. So I've been teaching since those days, right? I used to talk about did you know that there's the primary color to what you see, right? And your red, yellow, right? And so this is what you see with a lot of the gaming color cases too. And so in combination of those color, what you have is you have other color like magenta and blue and other things. Red, yellow, and green. All right. For 20, what is the functionality of digitizer on your touchscreen for your phone and your laptop? Okay. It's able to detect and transmit touch onto the system. So when you're looking at the smartphone, like your iPhone or your Samsung or what is the LG, whichever you use, it has a sensor that's built onto the touch on the screen on the top. What that does is it has a heat sensor, right? So when you move your finger close to it, because you are human and you transmit heat, and also your body transmit signal, right? You know that we radiate signal. So it's able to detect that and it transmit your touch. So as you move, and also pressure. So these sensors are built onto the actual screen. So as you move your finger, it's able to transmit that signal into the system as an input. Okay. Now, with that, right, I'm going to go back a little bit into security. You have to make sure you control the permissions for your app. A lot of the times your app requests access to location, sound, and a lot of things. Those are also informal input, right? So it also transmit information into your system. As AI become predominantly used, like because I read a lot about Anthropic, I'm going through Anthropic training now, right? What you see is that AI, just like your browser, it gathers everything about you. Okay, it really customized to you. So just be mindful about your data. Some people are like, I'm not using AI, but you know what? It's like the internet, it's here to stay. So you have to be with it, right? Or else. Okay. So when you're using your function keys, so what are those function keys? If you look on your keyboard, those are the F keys, right? And every system has a slightly different F keys. I have F keys to be able to change my display. So that way I can have more color, more visual. I also can change volume. I can also turn on Bluetooth or wireless. You can put things into airplane mode. So the F keys also are very important in IT, is that we use F key for setup access, like going to BIOS or system advanced setups. And your F keys have a little label on top, so it'll tell you, and every manufacturer use them slightly different. So make sure that you look at the manual or research the information. Any question? Okay, so 22. Why do companies dock laptops? So docking stations are, think of it like, sometimes it's just a little block, sometimes it's like, like a panel that you sit your laptop on so it can charge. But ultimately, what they're using it for is network connection. Okay. So it's used for charging the system. So if I'm an employee, I get to work at 8 a.m. in the morning. I have a laptop that I bring home for work. I would then sit it on the docking station or connect to it. Now I think most of them are USB. And then it's allowing me to charge as I use it. It's also allowing me to connect to nearby devices like printer. It also let me connect to the network. But most importantly now, they use it for cryptography. So cryptography is a way that we take information that is in plain text and make it not readable. It's kind of like, you have a code that you tell your friend, if I say this word, that means come over, right? So cryptography does that. It takes your regular information and convert it to something else that's different, that's not known to other people. Okay? And that's really popular now with your USB drives and other things. So with the healthcare company that I work with, I do a lot of implementation on the security side. And their rule is that when you come to work, you cannot bring drives like USB to work, right? And so we disable a lot of those things. And for the managers who do, we make sure that when they attach it, it encrypts and decrypts there. So when they detach it, like you know how you unplug your USB, it encrypts. So in case that they drop that USB in the bathroom, somebody picks it up, they cannot read the data on it. Question?
Yeah, is it different from the VPN?
Yeah, so VPN is it's called virtual private network. It's a way that we mask our connection. So let's think of it this way, like if I'm using VPN, I'm just connecting to a different way where people cannot see me. It's kind of like wearing a cloak, right? And driving on the street so they don't know who you are. Versus, walking down the street and say, here I am so and so, and I'm connecting to this system, right? So VPN is a way that we can cover our information as we access the internet. But cryptography is a way that we mask or encode the information so that way whatever you see in plain text is not, it's mumbo jumbo. Okay, I know this is long because I'm trying to get the course into 1 week. All right, so we already talked about 2223. How do you prevent data theft when you are using mobile system with documentation, right? Make sure you password lock function. Now, I think it's really important that you use password or PIN with your biometrics. I think most devices now allows you to do that. Something you have, something you know, something you are, somewhere you are, right? Sometimes it can also allow locations, but how you use your password is really important. I read about malware and some of the new malware now, what it does is it screen captures. So even if you install that onto your system and use antivirus on your phone, I'm serious, right? Because the new malware is really designed for mobile. So what you do is you want to make sure that you use strong password, right? Sometimes PIN is only a certain number of digits, but in my ethical hacking class, I talk about enumeration and I show them how it can be enumerated with different form of tools. So they crack password and it's just a matter of time. So if you give them time, they'll be able to do that. But the best way to capture a password is to phish a password, right? So don't click the link, right? Just be more mindful about like who sends it. I just talked to my parents about this because they keep telling me like I'm getting messages from my bank and it keeps asking me to reset the password, but I didn't access my bank app and I'm like, oh, that's a phish, right? So just be mindful about that. Suspicious, always be suspicious. Okay, some of the mobile devices, your tablet, your smartphones, now you have your smartwatch, everything that's wearable, even thermostat. I have a friend, I tell the story all the time. He lives in a smart home. So as he pulls his Tesla up to the driveway, the garage door automatically opens, the AC and the lights turn on because it detects, right? But the downside of that is I'll bring a flipper and I'll show it to you. But if you take my C class, right, I'll show it. So there's a device that if I walk near you and if you use your Tesla key, it captures and it mimics I'm sure you've seen some video. So you can regenerate that signal if you're using tap payment. Sometimes that can also be paired. But anyway, right, smart devices is convenient, but it also open up a lot of risk. So if you're using things that are interconnected, just be mindful. Okay, so we talked about some wearable mobile devices, right? Your smartwatch. I think Fitness Band has the most vulnerability because they are very cheaply made. And they don't keep up with the firmware. So when we say firmware, it's like instructions for the systems to measure your heart, to And so they don't always upkeep. Also, your surveillance camera, I always try to update my surveillance system, like your IP camera and so on. And then your earphones or your headphones or your VR. I think VR has its days. I don't think that VR really, now the smart glasses are coming back, right? The Meta glasses. So I have a pair and it's so invasive that I stopped using it because Meta wants to get into everything that you have on your smartphone. So, but you see a lot of wearable devices now that people use for different purposes. Um, but anything that you connect is tend to be riskful. Yeah.
Is your ethical hacking class here or?
Yeah, so I teach 27B in the spring. So forensic comes in the fall, which is 27A. And it's really cool because I actually make them do a drug dealer case where they have to find where the drug dealer was and how money was exchanged. And then in the spring, I teach an ethical hacking class, which is 27B. You don't have to take them in order. It's ideal in the certificate or the degree. One of them is an elective, but in my opinion, if you want to be a security or cybersecurity professional, you have to know forensic, pretty decent, and you have to know ethical hacking. Because if you work in a security operations center, which typically you respond to threat like attack, you have to know where it's coming from and how to stop it. And you have in ethical hacking, we teach like how it's being attacked. Like, so I would let you attack system so that way you see and how you prevent it. So and my class is hands-on. So but you can find my videos on YouTube as well, and I go through all the lab and the lecture for that class if you're interested. Okay, so let's go through and look at some of these cables. These are older cables. Most of you are using USB-C, which I think it's a good choice for Apple to go with C, right? For and to that so that way it's standardized with the industry. But they're coming out with a new cable and a new port. Let's just leave it to Apple to have a unique device. So for A plus, they are gonna ask you some old stuff and some new stuff. So you need to know. So back in the day, when you have the iPods, ask your parents about iPods, right? So before we had smartphone that can stream music, we used to have a device that we download music and listen to it. And that's called the iPod. So we would use devices or the old Apple, like the Apple iPhone 2, which it was. So I did my master's thesis when iPhone 2 just came out. And there was a claim from Apple that iPhone 2 is not reachable. 2 days later, it was reachable. It was all over the news, right? So my thesis was on mobile security, which emphasizes, iOS and other areas.
You have my iPhone.
Oh, okay. Keep those that you can sell them for a lot of money sometimes because people want them. But yeah. It's crazy how things go through technology changes so quick.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So this is a 30-pin Apple iOS power and sync cable. So back in the day, when you have old Apple systems, you would need to power or charge using this cable or transfer data. When we say sync cable, that means transfer data, right? This is the old lightning cable, right? Some of you have seen this with the older iPhone where you use it to charge or to transfer data. And my students, they always mix them up like the USB. Which USB is which? All right.
I have a question.
Sure.
For number 2,
Uh-huh.
what is that cable charging slow sometimes not
So Apple actually standardized their cable. If you buy cables that are not made by Apple because they are made not meeting the standard. So there's standards number that the industry follow, just like Bluetooth, right? You ever have like an older earphone and then they change the Bluetooth standard and it's no longer paired, right? So if they don't meet the standard, it doesn't work. But Also, when you buy cable, make sure you read the description. It needs to power and sync because they have to design the cable to do that. Some cable only charge and some cable do both. It's a lot of people say, oh, I'll just buy a cheap cable and it works. No, that cheap cable only charges, right? Through USB, but then it doesn't transfer the data. So, because sometimes they don't meet the standard for the sync process, or they're not designing the cable with that wire. Okay, so for 3, this is a mini USB, and it has a little groove, right? A little bit more rectangular. It has a groove at the edges. This is for like the older systems. I think a lot of the mini USB has gone out, but you might see like an older device that needs it. And this is 2.x. So so when we say 2.1 or whatever, you just say USB 2 or USB 3, right? So the USB 3 is predominantly used, or USB-C now. What you see is like it's much better using the C because it's faster and it's able, not all USB-C is able to provide display, even though they claim that USB-C is able to use as a display cable. So just make sure you check the cable information. And then number 4 is your micro USB, more flat. And this is different than the HDMI or the mini HDMI. That's only for display, high definition. This is USB is for like data transfer or charging. So the bigger end, right? As some of you pick up this is USB what? A. Okay. The big end that has the 2 holes is always A, and this is a 2, USB 2. Now, if you plug it into the USB 3 port on your computer, which is the far right, it works. But remember, so think of it like, this is a car that you can drive 40 miles per hour, right? But you're taking it to the express lane, right? The toll road where you can do, let's say, 80 miles per hour. It's only going to be able to drive putt 40 miles per hour.
My vision is really bad. I don't see what you're referring to.
Your USB, yeah. So just your USB, yes. Question?
So if you have like, let's say USB 3.0 right in here,
Mhm.
and then you have a USB 2.0 plug into there, it's gonna show like there's a different type of speed in there in a gigabit per second in there.
Right. And it's only going to be maxed to 2.0 because it's standardized. This is like the maximum, the motor of the car that you have, right? Even if you have very high speed roads, you cannot drive faster, right? That's your device. So the speed is really limited to your device or the bus, the path. So if your path is fast and your device is slow, then the maximum capacity is your device. So ideally, what we should have is the C on the C port, right? So that's the fast car and fast lane. Understand? So that's ideal, that's optimal, but not always. We are going to have different type of devices that's plugged in. It's only going to be limited to your device speed.
I have a question.
Sure.
You have an old cell phone,
Mhm.
like the one that uses the type.
The micro or the mini? The 4?
The type 2.
Oh, okay, the type 2.
Yes. Can you find an adapter to use the number panel?
Yeah, they sell adapters. So adapter is just converter. Yeah. So yeah, it's just gonna be the speed of your device. And also sometimes adapter is poorly made, so it's gonna be 2.0. Right? So the basic is that most devices are 2.0. Just like your Wi-Fi. People are like, 5G is the best, 5G is the best. Guess what? Most of the devices that are wireless is at 2.4. It's 2G. Okay. Yeah. So because if you go on public Wi-Fi, all the APs are 2.4 because it's spanned further. Whereas, so the higher the frequency, the shorter the distance. That's the rule because and unless you repeat that signal, right? That's for the next class. So anyways, so coming back to what you said, most of the devices are made for 2.0 because just more common devices more available devices that are 2.0. You do see a lot of 3.0 and C. Now I think I just bought a bunch of C cable because I love that it charges so quickly, right? And it transfers so quickly. And, so C is probably the best if you have C. But you have A to C. So when you're looking at your cable, one big N, rectangular N, and the other C, guess what? It's still going to be 2.0 to C. So it's kind of like you have a big motor, a small motor in a Corvette body, right? Just like I tell my husband, we have fiber, but then it comes to coaxial. So I'm like, it's kind of like getting high speed to our street and then to our house is like pop, 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 right? Unless you dig a fiber to your home. So yeah, so it's like, are we really using things optimal? So that's a consideration from here on. Right. All right. Near field communication, tap pay. AirDrop is NFC. Be careful when you use this. Okay. Remember that this is air-based wave, right? Like I said, the flipper is a thing that I can buy for $200 and I can capture your near field communication. But did you know that if you make like reader to be able to impede signal, like to jam signal, that's illegal. That lands people in prison, right? But why is the flipper legal in the United States? It's because they use it for educational purposes, right? So you can find something like that. But near field communication is definitely convenient, but it's not very safe. Okay. So you know how they sell like those block the signal wallets and things for you to travel? It's just because your chip sends signal. And so that's why credit card, I think the new passport has chip built in now for the card. We digitize a lot of things. So as we do that, data sits somewhere and we have to be mindful about safety. Okay, infrared. You see this with like, when you go to the store and they forget to take the tags off or the library, right? It sounds. It's mostly used for theft detection these days. And then 802.11, this is for Wi-Fi. And then your mobile signal.
The difference between what you have there, WI slash I and what WIFI without a slash.
No, so Wi-Fi stands for wireless fidelity, right? It's really classified for that 802.11. You also have other bands. So all of the things we use is radio band in the spectrum. And so 802.11 takes a small portion of the spectrum between 800 megahertz all the way to what you see with 5G, right? So if you are using 5G, it's just the frequency is at the higher end of the signal. Whereas if you are looking at 2.4, which is your typical wireless, is in the middle. And then your cordless phone is 600 to 800 hertz. So it's at the low end of that radio part of the spectrum. But your signal for your radio station and things, it's in that same band, right? And then you got like radiology stuff that they use for x-rays on the higher end of the spectrum. So all of this is all coming back to like radio signal.
For the mobile, there is like effect for using those meta classes.
I mean, there's not concrete research about like how much, my husband always tells me that like I radiate like signal because I'm like in my work office, I always have a lot of gadgets, right? Because I love gadgets. Yeah, there's some study that shows that like a lot of these radio signal generates and people say that cell towers and things like that impact people's health. I don't think that there's true concrete evidence because when they look at the population, it's kind of small. So as we are using technology in a different way for a long time, you start to see that. Is there a direct impact between more people having cancer with this? What I see is like, even if you use your microwave, that's also a form of radiation, right? So Just be mindful about like what you use and how you use it. When you go to the dentist and they check your x-ray, you are exposed to radiation already, right? So, you know, can't a lot of too much things can be hurtful, right? So we just, so I don't really have any kind of concrete research information about that, but I did read something about like they study where they put the cell tower in certain areas and that impacts some people in the local area. But this is why like all the resistance in California building data center for AI right now. You guys hear about that? So they want to come to Inland Empire and build out AI data center. The benefit is it's going to generate a bunch of jobs for us, right? But the downside is it's going to consume a lot of water and then power and a lot of the resources. So there is some resistance in Southern California having data center. But they're going to come because, as a state, we are highly evolved and, a lot of technical companies are here. So they want to house a lot of stuff here. So we'll see. We'll see how that's going to be. So if you're looking at environmental impact, yeah, there's a lot of things that we use that are damaging, but at the same time, the effect of that can be long span or short. Okay, when you're buying a charger for your mobile devices, look at your arm. Okay, so I'm always at stores looking at like those power bank, and one day this one lady, she was like, "Which one do I buy?" Right? She was talking to her son, and I was like, "Buy the 10,000 mega amp." Right? So the higher the amount here that you see, that's gonna give you longer charge. I'm sure you know. The little ones that you buy that's like 3,000, that's like a few dollars, right? That's probably gonna charge one thing for a short time. So you want to get the higher the value that's say MAH, that's high. And then also the amperage that's outputting, that's important. And then the type of USB connection, like 3.0 C, that's important. Okay, where am I? Okay, 6:30. All right, how do I obtain media access controller address? Okay, you're gonna try this with me. Okay, you're gonna click on your search bar and you are going to type CMD or command. Type CMD in your search bar. Okay. CMD.
That's what she said. CMD.
So this is command line for Windows, right? This, for those of you who are going to go into IT, is going to be your best friend. I say that about all the configuration tools. So CMD, or you can also search for command prompt. We cannot run as administrator because we're a regular user logging into the system. You can just click open. All right, so it shows my login right here, right? And if you log in as guest, it show that. Now the difference between this account and an administrator account is the path, right? Every account has its own path for file storage. Okay, let me see if I can change. Oh, they disable. Okay, you are gonna do ipconfig/all. So where did I type the command? See how the ipconfig/all like that. ipconfig, one word, space/all, and then press enter. Okay. So this command tells you everything about your internet protocol connection. Every system that is on the network has an IP address. Think of it like every house in your neighborhood has an address, right? ipconfig/all or space/all, make sure you have the space. That's going to give you all the configuration about your computer connection to the internet or the network. Okay? All right. You see the physical address right here? that's your MAC address. That is called the Media Access Controller address. This is a permanent address that is given to your adapter, your Wi-Fi adapter, your physical adapter. So what did I type? ipconfig /all. When you call tech support and you're like, I don't have internet connection, they tell you to restart your computer because when you restart, it refreshes your connection. Second, to troubleshoot, they are going to look at your address information. Now, you see, these are the adapters that are listed, right? So if I'm on Ethernet, this is my physical address. But if I'm on wireless, I have a different address because it's two different cards. Each adapter has its own address. Now, this is important for networking down the line, right? Only because, one, I'm going to tell you the story about security because it's easy to grasp. We use this to trace the actual system. So let's say that I'm a hacker. I'm going into your network. I'm pretending to be your computer, right? Because that's the way I can mask myself to be accepted in your network. So the way that we follow that system is two addresses, the IP address and the MAC address. The MAC address bring it to the physical system. The IP address bring it to that section of the network. It's kind of like which house is it on the street, and then you go to the actual house. Yes.
The signing and then the IP address.
Yeah. Yeah, so if you do a command, right? Now the trick is if you up arrow key, it repeats the command. But if I just do ipconfig, it gives me a summary. Okay. And you have to look at your adapter. So I'm connecting Ethernet, so my IP. But if you do the /all, which is what we call an option, it gives you more details. The all gives you the physical address.
And that's what they use when you do the signing.
When you sign in, when you boot your computer, your IP is actually automatically obtained. It's default configured like that. But the physical address is already built onto your card. So it's kind of like when you buy a house, it already has an address, right? The county gives it an address for that land lot. But the IP address can be permanent or not permanent. Typically, it's not. So I can have a different IP address, let's say 3 months from now, because that's how we dynamically use it. So that way we have enough address. So it's kind of like saying, look for the house that's yellow, but 5 years from now, my house might be pink because I changed, right? But the physical address is completely permanent to that adapter. Can they spoof it? Can they mask it? Yeah, you can use software to change it. Okay, so that's how you find it. Okay, so how can I also obtain the physical address in your iOS or your MacBook? The way that you do that is in your settings menu and you go to your Wi-Fi information and it's under Wi-Fi address. All systems have IP address that when they're connected to the network. And Apple uses UID. I think now the Android does that. UID is the physical address of the system, which is your MAC address. Yes. Question? Okay. Okay, so when you're setting up your email access in your mobile devices, what's the difference between using POP3 or IMAP? So POP stands for Post Office Protocol version 3, right? This is an older protocol that is used to be able to transmit web email. So the way that your Gmail and your Outlook.com and all of these things work, let's not use Outlook because Outlook sometimes tied to a different protocol, which is SMTP. Anyway, POP, the way it works is like your postal mail. Okay, so if I need to send you a package, it goes from my post office to the next post office and then your post office. So those are mail servers that's passing your email, and we're still using that, right? So in forensic, I always tell my students, we have to know where that malware comes from, right? We have to see which server transferred that email that sends the attachment with the malware. So in between, you can see that there's a lot of different mail server, there are post office that transmit your email across. So POP is used for webmail such as Yahoo, Gmail. So those of you who are my era, AOL. Yahoo is also old, right? Now and Live, those are even Microsoft is saying that they're retiring the Live server. They're converting everything over to Outlook. But anyway, IMAP is used for email server configuration. Okay. So these are like protocols, and when we say protocols, they're a set of rules that the systems use to follow. It's kind of like at home, you know that maybe your parents or family member says that the rules is that we're gonna have dinner at 8, right? And you follow that. Your system has a set of rules that it follows for email, for network connections, for opening files, downloading files, etc. Okay. If you're using wireless devices or mobile devices, make sure you run firmware updates, right? In your, like, if you push Android updates, Apple does regular update, or actually they make you upgrade too, right? To a new OS. So with that, you update software, and you also in your smartphone, you update software, but also sometimes firmware. So the firmwares, where do you see it? In your microphone, geolocation sensor, those things are important. Updates, very, very important in security, because this is how they get you. Okay. Because if you're behind in updates, they would use your vulnerability, which is the weakness in your system, and that's how they can get in. And it's also making your system function better. Okay. Well, not always. I take that back. Windows sometimes update doesn't always work out for the best, but most of the time. But we run updates just to close out security issues, for sure. Okay, 3, data synchronization. When you synchronize, you already know contacts. Email, apps, music, and video. Now, Apple makes you synchronize everything to your iCloud, right? Google or Android based, it's going to be to your Google account. Synchronize is good because it backs up your data, but synchronize is good if you maintain your data safety, right? So make sure you check your account security, because, and then also the apps, some of the apps, they want your contact information for marketing purposes and other things. So just make sure you check your permission when you're using your apps. But you can also sync app data, music, and video. I think now they're doing a better job with controlling the security for your mobile devices. And then we can sync it through the cloud, right? The car, I don't recommend this, but a lot of the cars now, right, it actually pushes data from, like, if you download music, you can use it to play. It uses the app through the car, and also talking to the app on the phone. You can sync it to your system or other devices. Your car is I use Bluetooth sometimes, and I have to turn it off, because if you ever seen like videos on how people can control cars remotely, right? Your car has a computer, and if you don't update the firmware on the computer, it is also very vulnerable too. So, the OnStar or the satellite location, I was like, I don't know if, so I have a family member that has one of those fancy, EV that they use satellite, and basically you can sit in the car and it drives you everywhere, right? Wherever you want, as long as you have eye maintaining on it detects your eye. So you can't really be sleeping. But anyway, But satellite, they know wherever you are. So, I don't know if I want to disclose all of that information about where I am and where I go. But when you use Google Map, right? Google always remind you, hey, you were here at this time. So a lot of the data we use is out there already. Yeah. The services that so it's not always like to our control. Data leak is a lot of the times it's the service that we use, like T-Mobile, Verizon. Okay. Any questions? So if you're done with this, save it. And the way that you submit, right? If you don't have access to it yet, you can go to assignments or the module itself, right? You click on the in-class assignment. And then unlike you, right? So I'm going to go to the student view. You're going to click start assignment. And then you are going to add a file, attach it, and then submit. So make sure you attach the file. Make sure the file has, or you can drop it in here, drag it. So that's how you. You can save it as a Word document, which is originally what it is, right? If you use the computer here, they have Word, but if you have, I think now Canvas have Pages, so it converts it also. But it's kind of slow. Yeah, you can make it into a PDF or keep it as Word. You can submit it that way. And then I will grade it when, it will give me a link to grade. Okay, any question? Okay, so I'm going to give you a little break. I know some of you, already, it's been a little bit of time. So bathroom break, snack break, like 10 minutes. And then we'll come back and we'll work on the next part of the class and be done for the day. Yes. Yeah, so you click on the assignment. You have to go to the Canvas. Back to your app. Yeah. Sure. Doesn't have an account. Yeah, I think you probably should talk to plug it in. Yeah, so I think you should talk to student services to fix this. Yeah, exactly. And you have until the end of the week. Yeah,
That's when.
okay. I'm sorry.
Oh. I just registered today. I don't have any account.
Yeah,
Somebody-
yeah. So
Yeah.
you can do that later.
Okay.
Yeah, just you can submit when throughout the week. It's open until Friday. Let me end this.